I guess we should situate the eclipses in that context because this eclipse series actually started 1 year ago in what was it, September of 2024 when we had our first eclipse in Pisces. Then we had a Virgo eclipse in March, which is the next step into that series. And this is the first time that we get the full set of eclipses in Pisces and Virgo. But for some people, what we're in then is the next phase in a sequence and an unfolding of events that started last fall or 1 year ago during the first eclipse in Pisces that's now going to accelerate into the next phase here under this eclipse.
Yeah, and so this being the first eclipse season where we get a Pisces and a Virgo right next to each other, will make whatever the themes that you've noted over the last year, whatever themes seem to have been connected with the nodes having ingressed into Pisces and Virgo, and one eclipse here and one eclipse there. This should make it super obvious, both for the collective as well as for individuals. This is our first like full no holds barred Pisces Virgo eclipse season.
Yeah. And this is also then the first time that you'll see that dynamic that's so unique with eclipses where you have two houses being activated in the chart that are diametrically opposite and therefore usually are completely separate parts of the life. But all of a sudden you have these major beginnings and endings that start happening in both areas that sometimes tie them together in unique ways when those two houses aren't normally connected. So, for example, like in this chart that I just have up this random time, the eclipse is taking place in the fourth house of the home and the living situation and the 10th house of career. And normally those would be separate areas, but for some people, having them take place in those two houses, they're going to have some major changes at home that may be tied in with major changes that are happening in their career, where, for example, like you get a new job, but it forces you to move across the country, or vice versa, where you have some major change at home with your living situation or your parents that necessitates a change in terms of your job and your career.
Yeah. Yeah, one forces the other, forces the other. You get a feedback loop between the nodes and between the eclipses. And
Yeah.
again, like that started a year ago, but we haven't had a chance to see it really clearly just operating one after another like we will this month.
Yeah, like a year ago, it was the Pisces house. Then in March, it was the Virgo house, and now it's both. Can we quickly run through the other houses? Because you had some good ones recently when we went through the oppositional pairs of houses. So, first house and seventh house, for example, you see people going through major changes with relationships versus their self-identity. And so, for example, sometimes it's like you have a relationship ending that your identity was very tied up in. So then all of a sudden you have to like re-identify or redevelop your sense of self and who you are outside of relationships.
Right. Or I'm going through these changes. I'm finding out that like I've discovered this person that I am absolutely becoming, and I'm not sure how to reconcile this person I'm becoming with my relationship, right? And it throws the two into dialogue and potentially crisis. And some of the serpentine or draconic symbolism is useful here when you think of snakes shedding skin, right? And
Mm,
having to go through, having to go through a very uncomfortable, yeah, an uncomfortable and sometimes paralyzing or immobilizing period of renewal, where there are like changes happening within, you don't exactly understand it, but you need to crawl into a hole and shed the skin.
absolutely. And sometimes the changes are actually happening with your partner, like they're going through some
Hmm.
major transformative changes, but then somehow that has this indirect effect of you having to think about, your own identity and challenging your sense of self. Like, there was a couple of people actually recently that had examples of like first house, seventh house activations where one of them, their partner, they were in a lesbian relationship, and then their partner transitioned and became trans, and then it caused this like self-identity conflict with the person because they'd always been in a same-sex relationship and now they weren't, and going through a process with
Mhm.
that. And it was a really interesting, like unique manifestation of that. But there's many different like combinations of how changes with your partner can sometimes then affect you and your sense of self-identity.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, you have that. Um, you have that teeter totter in the seventh in all the houses, but it's so clear in the seventh and first.
Absolutely. All right. So then the second house and the eighth house often ends up being the material and financial axis, where sometimes there can be like a change in your partner's finances where, let's say, they lose a job or maybe they get a new job, and then that indirectly impacts your finances if you start thinking about how you make money and what your financial situation is, and if you should work as much, if they're making all the money, or in some instances, if they lose a job and suddenly you have to pick up the slack by bringing in more income.
Yeah, absolutely. Like like the teeter totter, but bars of gold are being stacked on both sides, rather than human bodies. Also, I see a lot of debt and inheritance. I see people
Yeah.
go like be like, oh, I need some money, so I'm going to borrow a lot of it, which is connecting the second and eighth, or a period where, oh, I'm finally going to pay off all that debt, as well as inheritance, right? Which is it was somebody else's eighth, but now it moves over to mine second.
Yeah, absolutely. The inheritance is like one of the most clear ways that there can be like a transfer from eighth house showing up of other people's resources or money, and second house and your own.
Yeah, that and literally paying your taxes is a second eighth house transfer that goes the other way that we all should be doing.
Yeah, should be doing. Alternatively, when you're not doing it and you get in trouble, that is one way that it can get activated as well.
Well, the I am terrified of the imagined consequences of not paying my taxes exactly. So I'm always very excited to give the government money.
Nice. As I think that's a shared experience we can
It's
all
it's it's my
relate.
don't hurt me, bro payment.
Right. All right, so that's the second house. Eighth house. Moving on, the next combination is the third house and the ninth house, where
Yeah.
sometimes you can go through some major transformations in terms of your education or your beliefs about the world, which can be like religious, but it can also be like political or other things like that. And sometimes that can impact like the way that you talk to other people or the way you communicate in the world in general.
Yeah, that's like the big shifts in perspective that we see in the eighth being tied into how you talk about things, who you hang out with, et cetera, is a big third ninth thing. Another third ninth thing that I see, I have nodes in the third ninth, and I'm having my opposition in third ninth
Mm,
now with these, is how prioritized short term projects, like what's the weekly schedule look like? What am I going to get done this month? Third house versus like long term big projects. Ninth is like, what do I want to accomplish before ninth is like bucket list, or what do I want to accomplish before my second Saturn return? Those, that kind of planning and aspiration where you look to the horizon of, from whatever age you are, you look to the horizon, you're like, well, when you're a teenager, by the time I'm 30, I would like to. And so a shifting of priorities is something that you often see with eclipses in third, ninth. We're like, oh, I've been dreaming about this long term stuff, but really I need to get to work on this third house stuff. Or like I've been too much caught up in the mix and the rat race, and I need to like reaffix my eyes to the horizon and think about long term goals, which of course will mean that you're going to do short term daily prioritization differently. But that, like, those two time frames of aspiration and goal orientation is a huge thing I see with third and ninth.
absolutely. Yeah. There can also just be, this is the mobility axis, both with long distance travel with the
Yeah.
ninth house, as well as interaction with foreign countries and for people from foreign places compared to what you grew up with, and the third house and getting around your local environment, including your neighborhood and your city, and how sometimes there can be changes happening with both of those, which can indicate like taking a major trip abroad, or sometimes major changes in terms of your ability, your mobility, and your ability to get around your home city.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Two more axes. One of them is the fifth house, 11th house. And you actually had a good one for this last month, but I had an example of this that somebody had for me recently where they started attending new groups and making new friends using it like a hobby that they were interested in, and they started like attending conferences and local meetings related to that hobby. But then all of a sudden they met somebody that they got into a romantic relationship with that started as kind of like a low level fling, activating the fifth house, and then turned into like a broader like romantic thing.
That's nice. Yeah, the one of the things I noticed like, I don't know, a decade ago with 5th, 11th is for people who are creative professionals or aspiring creative professionals or even outside of that. Like the 5th house is the stuff that you create and the 11th house is the people that can see it. And so the
Mm,
11th has a lot to do with audience. And the 5th is what you're making, right? Which those two, of course, are not the same thing, but are intimately tied together. And I've read charts for a bunch of creative professionals where, like, for example, during one set of eclipses, this was North Node 5th, South Node 11th. They're like, oh, I need to go into hiding and remove myself from my audience so that I can work on a thing so that I have something for them, right? And then
mm,
I've also seen the converse many times where it's like, oh, I need to stop hiding from people and just working on something, and I need to let people see what I've been spending all of my creative energy on. Um,
definitely. Definitely. And then, primary significations and most literal of the fifth house is children, as well as sometimes topics related to sex and sexuality. And then the 11th house is the house of friends and groups, and just major beginnings and major endings in both of those areas can just come up in different ways, sometimes independently when you have eclipses in that axis, and sometimes in ways that cross over in like interesting ways. Like there was one person I talked to months ago where their child, I think, graduated from school, but all of their friends were connected with like their kids like friend group or something like that. So it was going to completely change the social dynamic of the person and the type of social circles they were moving in because of this ending of one chapter in their child's life and the beginning of another.
I'm really glad you brought that up because that's such a thing. Like, having recently become a parent, I mean, last year, right? Um, the degree to which that changes your 11th house, like somebody's like, hey, do you want to meet up for lunch? I was like, no, we don't have a babysitter. You can come over, right? And we
Mm,
can hang out, but like I'm watching Lucian. Um
right.
like I no, I can't do that. And then suddenly your friends that already have kids become much more interesting because you're like, oh my God, you know how to do this. Like how to like the your social orientation has to change when you have children, and that's really interesting to think about on the other side, right? Oh, the kids are off to college, and now you have to reorient again. But yeah, the 5th and 11th being opposing but deeply intertwined on that child friends axis is that's a great call.
Yeah, absolutely. So, major beginnings and major endings when it comes to friends and friendship, and major beginnings and endings when it comes to children can often be a major topic of eclipses in those houses. And finally, we move on to the last axis, which is when eclipses fall in the sixth house, 12th house axis. And for me, this is primarily the health axis, where I especially see the sixth house pertaining to physical health and things that it takes to maintain your physical health or to fix things when something goes wrong with your physical health. Whereas the 12th house especially pertains to mental health and what it takes when sometimes you're going through a period of bad mental health versus other periods where you're focusing on that area more and you're trying to expend more effort to improve your mental health for some reason, such as like, starting to see a therapist or something like that. But having major beginnings and major endings when it comes to that axis can be common.
Yeah. So yeah, I also do physical and mental health for sixth and 12th. I also do one thing I also see is especially with eclipses, there is um, visible versus concrete, or excuse me, invisible versus visible problems, or concrete versus abstract problems, which often coincides with physical and mental, but is not exactly the same. Like sometimes, like I've seen people who've been suffering from a physical ailment that was undiagnosable. Then, when the sixth house is pinged, it moves from the 12th, where it was like this nebulous affliction, to being a very clear thing. And then I also see people dealing with a physical thing, right? Like I keep having this problem with my foot, and then being and having an aha moment where they're like, oh, actually, I keep hitting my foot because of this, let's say, mental or emotional pattern. Like, oh, it's because I keep doing this thing for these reasons, I don't know, connected to this thing that happened when I was 5. And that's why this physical thing keeps happening. But things
Mm.
exchanging between the clear physical and diagnosable, and the mysterious or mentally or spiritually caused, but like things pinging back and forth between those two.
I love that. Yeah, that's perfect. Let's see. Other things, the 12th house is also it can be traditionally enemies or people that you don't get along with, where sometimes there's just people in your life that either you don't get along with for whatever reason, or sometimes people that actively try to do something that's harmful for you and going into a new chapter of like beginning some major turning point with respect to that, or sometimes ending something that's taken place there. And conversely, the 12th house can be your workplace and dealing with things in
Hmm.
your workplace as a major beginning or ending. Sometimes when those are tied together, it can be like somebody you're not getting along with in the workplace and some major turning point with respect to those. The 12th house, finally, I've been seeing a lot of just examples lately of the 12th house and seclusion being like the major topic, both as a sometimes a greater need for seclusion and sometimes the helpful or like healing potential sometimes of isolating yourself and going to places of seclusion can be one of actually the benefits of the 12th house, even though seclusion can sometimes have negative connotations as well, like places of seclusion like hospitals or even like prisons.
Yeah. The word that I tend to use for the positive, potentially healing seclusion, is retreat. And I see people going on
Mm,
retreats with big 12th, good 12th house stuff. And I think
nice.
that there's a very nice pairing and contrast to be drawn between like workplace, sixth house, and going on a retreat, or the negative version of a retreat, which is also a 12th house classic, is going to the hospital, which is also, it's outside of the normal flow of life. You're definitely not going to work when you're at the hospital. But sometimes that too is necessary. But it's like out, it's both like a yoga retreat or a meditation retreat, as well as a stay at the hospital, or a mental hospital. Like those are those are meaningfully opposed to going to work.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes that being okay and like understanding that there's periods in which you are forced to be less active so that you can heal and get better from something and going through a period, especially for like highly active people, sometimes going through a period of rest and recovery and retreat can be a little bit foreign to what they're used to, but sometimes necessary in order to eventually reemerge, in good shape.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We need, and also to get perspective. Getting outside of your life for a little bit is a really good way to get perspective on what that life is.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah,
And then last thing, go ahead.
no, please go ahead.
I was going to say, just last thing about the 12th house is I've seen some real instances of people dealing with mental health issues that were struggling with 12th house things and the importance of getting help when you need it. And I just wanted to really stress that because I've seen some instances of people not getting help when they needed it lately that were struggling with 12th house issues versus talking to people who did get help when they were struggling with 12th house mental health things and the huge difference that it makes in terms of the constructiveness of getting some help from somebody who actively wants to help you like navigate through those things can make a world of difference.
Yeah, it sure can.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a bit of an unplanned digression, and we've never done that before, but that was amazing. Thanks for going through that with me because the reason we did that is because that's going to be applying to this entire month, not just the first eclipse where we have the Pisces eclipse in the first 2 weeks of September, but then it also applies to the second 2 weeks of September where we have the Virgo eclipse, which we haven't fully looked at the details of yet, but
Not
everything
yet.
we everything we just said will apply to everyone in a very personal way based on what axis those eclipses fall in.
Yeah, and I think that was a good exercise because you really do want to think about the various exchanges and interrelations and like reciprocal actions that happen on an axis, because like what happens, think of them as teeter totters where anything that the eclipses drop on one side will affect and necessitate adjustment on the other, rather than thinking like, oh, it's an eclipse in Pisces, well, I will just think about Pisces in that house. Like, yes, it is the Pisces side of the teeter totter, but thinking of it as six planks or interrelated axes or systems is going to get you a much better understanding of what's happening in September.